Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm sitting in front of my bookcases like a good booktuber, and I am here to discuss my ranking of the nonfiction Octafinals for the 2021 BookTube Prize. A couple of days ago, Robert announced the official end of the Octafinals and which books would be advancing to the quarterfinals. And of the three books I chose to advance, my top two are now in the quarterfinals. So that's very exciting, and overall I'm very happy about how things ended up with my group. I will link to Robert's video down below. And also my video that I made a couple of months ago giving my first impression of reading the 6 books I will now talk about. I wrote a little script on my phone where I go into detail about my rankings, starting with the book that I ranked in last place at number 6, and ending with the book I rated first place. So here we go. Starting at number 6, I put Fairest by Meredith Toulousan. This is a memoir chronicling the youth and the young adult life of Mark Toulousan, basically up until the time that she transitioned into Meredith. It's a book about one person's trans experience, but really it's about more than that too. It's about the complicated identities of immigrants as Toulousan immigrated from the Philippines to the United States. It's about the complications of skin color, since Toulousan is an albino and could pass as white. Mostly it's about Toulousan's quest to find her true self, and here I have some criticisms, since Toulousan, who is now in her 40s, is writing a memoir about her 20s. Toulousan claims to have wanted intimacy in her 20s, but she, or really I should say he, was callous and shallow a lot of the time. It's obvious that he sabotaged a lot of what he claimed to desire with regards to intimacy. And I wish Toulousan in her 40s would have owned up to it. There was something that just struck me as a little bit disingenuous here. I'm also not thrilled with how Toulousan defines womanhood, which is very much filtered through the male gaze. I realize I can't force anyone else to define womanhood the way I do. And plenty of cis women are too dude crazy for me too. I'm not denying Toulousan's womanhood, but the way she defined her transition was very alien to me as a fellow woman. Still, there's a lot to admire in here. Toulousan is a larger-than-life sort of character, a child TV star and a risque performer in her adult years. Definitely some interesting stories to share in there. When it comes to her transgender expression, Toulousan doesn't deny her past as a gay male, and she doesn't see it as a dead time. That's interesting to me too, as a reminder that trans experiences are unique to individuals. I definitely want to get a move on concerning reading more trans literature about varying perspectives. In number 5, I have Radical Wordsworth by Jonathan Bate. Biographies, particularly of well-documented historical figures, tend to have a certain type of angle. In this book's case, it's the word radical. Bate made what I think he'd say is his signature claim, that the first 40 years of Wordsworth's life should be more centered in the public imagination than the last 40 years. That's why the picture on the cover is of Wordsworth as a young man, rather than Wordsworth as an old man. Ooh. Most of the pictures are his older pictures, so FYI. I feel like Bate sometimes in the narrative got almost catty about it. Like, ooh, old man Wordsworth totally sucks in comparison to young man Wordsworth. Young man Wordsworth was a radical. He spent his days jazzed up on the idea of French independence. He had a child with a French woman out of wedlock. And he spent his time writing amazing poetry that old man Wordsworth later tried to water down. To backtrack here, William Wordsworth and his friend Samuel Taylor Coleridge are seen as the granddaddies of Romantic poetry. Romantic poetry, instead of being about God and traditionally accepted religious mythology, is more about nature and our connection to it. Kind of scandalous back in the day. Though when Romantic Poets 2.0 comes around, your Lord Byrons and your Percy Shelleys et al. Charged Wordsworth with being too, self-centered, I guess in a revisionist tact or something. And also that he wasn't passionate enough about his former radical ideas. By that time, Wordsworth might be described as disillusioned, like with the French Revolution, which instead of leading to some utopic society, led to Napoleon. Whoops. He kind of retreated into being more involved in his home in the Lake District of England. That being said, it turned out that Old Man's Wordsworth kind of became a granddaddy of his own in the, metaphorical sense, this time to the nature conservation movement. And he's not quite the stuffy conservative that Bate in earlier chapters really led me to believe. So I don't really quite think Bate stuck the landing. Though I certainly never would have remembered all of these biological details of Wordsworth's life without this book. Bad English major. I was also very intrigued to see how his life juxtaposed against the European history of the time. That being said, I think there's a lot in this book that is inaccessible. Not many readers will care enough about romantic poetry for Bates' digressions into the philosophy behind it and yada yada. And there are so many block quotes from so many primary sources, because Bate is a historian and kind of writing like a historian. All of that being said, one person who definitely appreciated this biography was BookTube's own Steve Donahue. And I'll link to his review down below. In number 4, I put Minor Feelings by Cathy Park Hong. In a way, I feel like this essay collection attempted an impossible task. There is no way to codify some sort of Asian or even Asian American experience. Too many different ethnicities for that. So in lieu of being able to do a specific identity, Hong goes for something even broader and pitches Asians into the political world of non-whites. And in fact, people of color who stand against white supremacy by being part of formerly colonized nations. It's not that this isn't true, but it also applies to a bunch of non-Asian people too. There wasn't much in Hong's writing that went beyond the political, especially when framing much of the Asian American experience by way of our country's racial profiling. These are essays, so technically they don't have to be too personal. And yet I feel it was the two most personal essays that worked the best for me. Those are An Education and Portrait of an Artist. The former is specifically about Hong, who is a poet, and also about her artist friends in college. The latter is about a murdered Asian American poet, Teresa Hak Kyung Cha. Those were visceral essays which probed questions about identity and politics through individually rendered experiences. Hong is a good writer and a funny writer. She obviously, though deftly, took a sledgehammer to the idea of the meek, apologizing Asian woman who would never complain about anything. And she has surged back into the public eye recently with her commentary on recent violence against Asian Americans. I will leave a link to a couple of her interviews down below. All in all, I am not surprised that this book advanced into the BookTube Prize quarterfinals. Hong seems like an important voice in the community. In my number 3 spot, I put The Man Who Ate Too Much by John Birdsall. Returning to the idea that biographers have to define their certain hooks when it comes to famous subjects, for Birdsall, that hook was James Beard's homosexuality. James Beard was a famous chef and food writer from the 20th century who was an affable and gregarious bachelor type. So Birdsall linked that together with his illicit attempts to connect sexually and otherwise with other men. Of course, none of that could be known publicly at the time Beard was alive, so this was a pull back the curtain sort of memoir. That being said, I'm personally not that familiar with James Beard. I'm not a foodie, so he never really stuck out to me. Though, while reading this memoir, I randomly saw that my supervisor had one of his books on her shelves, so... Anywho, it was all very new to me. Beard growing up in Oregon, mostly with his mother, his relationship with food being brought on by her experience as a hotel manager, and also a little bit of his relationship with her Chinese chef, Juliette. Later in life, Beard gravitated toward French food, though he wanted to give his recipes more of a down-home feel than French food is known for in the United States. He also railed a bit about the mass production of food starting in the 40s and 50s, which was nothing like what he grew up with. I've seen reviewers center on the fact that Birdsall's books deals a lot with Beard's own book contracts, rather than like his recipes or the classes he taught. Speaking from my own bias as a non-foodie, that didn't bother me as much. But I guess it is kind of weird in retrospect. At least Birdsall didn't seem to lionize Beard, and could point out the famous man's flaws when it came to his professional relationships. The entire biography is written in an easy and accessible way. Kind of like fiction, but with fewer quotations. The footnotes are all hidden from public view, unless you want to flip to the back to find them. All in all, I found this to be an easy and well-written biography for someone I didn't know much about, so props for that. For number 2, I have Uncanny Valley by Anna Wiener. Speaking of good writing, we come to this memoir. Anna Wiener obviously schooled herself in lofty verbiage and complex cultural references. Her dream, it seems, was to enter the publishing world, but after too many years of fetching coffee for people at work, and then living in roach-infested apartments, she transitioned into customer service in the technology field. Her jobs at app startups ultimately brought her to Silicon Valley, the seat of this uncanny valley. If I may extrapolate a theory, the entire shtick here is about turning humans into algorithms for internet consumption. Wiener's jobs are unreal. She's making a shit ton of money, basically for scrolling forums, and manning apps that sometimes don't even see the light of day. In literary terms, this reminded me of Allegra Goodman's novel, The Cookbook Collector, or at least one of the plots in that novel. I will link my review for that book down below. So yeah, one of the storylines is about the dot-com boom of the last generation, though money is ultimately much more fragile there, given the ensuing dot-com bust. In Wiener's world, in our world, the new billionaires are, on a whole, still going strong. So, while dodging references to specific companies, Wiener spends a lot of time profiling these places. The billionaire CEOs, almost exclusively white men, who are all in their mid-20s, the overwhelming work hours they put in, but in a new workplace culture that is often based on a lot of leisure, like in-house coffee bars and skateboarding between workstations. She also talks about the way that her dedication to these places played into broader surveillance culture and gentrification and other negative side effects for the world. She doesn't quite pass judgment on herself, which irks some reviewers. For me, I feel like I'd rather the acknowledgement than some sort of performative remorse. In this case, I feel like a stick to the facts ma'am narrative is a little bit stronger. Which is also important because this book in part judges all of us. We are all, certainly all of us watching this video on YouTube, at least partially involved in today's technology world. By stripping major companies of their names, like Amazon is the online superstore and Twitter is the microblogging platform, we are reminded of the true power and influence these places, these digital places, have on our lives. All in all, this memoir is a great mix of the personal and the universal, told in a witty style. It doesn't exactly end well. The references to Trump's election in the epilogue seem a little forced. Trump is a symptom of the negative parts of online culture. I feel like the memoir itself proved that he isn't actually the disease. Wiener now writes about the tech world rather than taking part in it directly. A move back into publishing that was surely aided by the money that she made. In the more lucrative profession, I'll call it. In fact, as I was reading for the Octafinals, I randomly came across her conducting an interview for a literary fiction book launch. I'll link to the event, which was captured on video, down below, in case you're interested to see Wiener in what seems to be her natural habitat. Sans the roaches this time, I hope. And in number 1, I have Cast by Isabel Wilkerson. This one checked a lot of boxes when it comes to talking about nonfiction for the BookTube Prize. It was a socially relevant, politically important, and well-written book. Wilkerson's first since The Warmth of Other Suns, published in 2010, about the Great Migration of African Americans moving from the south of America to the north. I had high hopes for this book based on that book alone, and I'll link to my review of The Warmth of Other Suns down below. And Cast lived up to it for the most part. My big quibble with the book is exactly what I feared it would be. Wilkerson engages in comparative history with regards to the Indian caste system and Nazi Germany, comparing them to the real focus of this book, which is the systemic treatment of Black people in the United States. In this attempt at comparative history, Wilkerson ignores a lot of the specifics of the other two places, thereby drawing skewed or partially inaccurate pictures. Wilkerson wants to posit a not quite new framework when it comes to understanding systemic oppression. I think it's more about making the caste idea go mainstream, because she dredged up a lot of historical sources and also compared the racism of America to a caste system. But racism, the example that fits into the metadata, is what stuck with us. Wilkerson thinks that gives an incomplete picture of our past and present. She goes ahead and fashions several pillars of what makes a caste system, and she uses examples from her 3 test subjects to fill in the blanks. When it comes to documenting Black history in the US, Wilkerson uses everything from statistics to personal and national stories of abuse. She maintains a professional distance, purposefully I'm sure, because the data washing over the reader leaves a mark of its own. It is nauseating and terrifying to think about how much we've allowed these systems of hate to rule over our lives. I think there is room to debate how much some of her examples, like our hyper-capitalist healthcare situation, is caused by caste versus other concerns. But I feel like that makes this book stronger, because social history is a living and breathing and complex entity, so long as we stick with the foundation. Wilkerson was fond of her house metaphors too. The foundation being that systemic racism in this country is a well-documented fact. But the insides, how we treat each other and why, are vast. To harken back to Steve Donahue's review, where he named this book the top nonfiction book of 2020, he writes that caste is an invaluable shorthand for our times. And thus, I find myself putting this book in the #1 spot for the BookTube Prize Octafinals. And I'll dare to make a bet here as well. I think this one will make it to the finals. Guess we'll see if I have to eat my words. So that about covers it for me now. You can find links to my Goodreads reviews for all 6 of these books down below now that I can officially post them. I will be back on this channel within the next few days to talk about the next round of the BookTube Prize, the quarterfinals, where I am judging in nonfiction Group C. And I have some preliminary thoughts to share about those books before I start reading, so stay tuned. Thank you so much, especially to Robert, for the amazing work of putting this prize together and keeping on top of us throughout these past 2 months and certainly most of the rest of this year. Thank you to all of the judges who have posted videos online, which I have been ravenously watching. It is so intriguing to see your thought processes over what you read and why you ranked them the way you did. I hope that this video is a worthy addition to that project. So yeah, in the meantime, thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you next time.